No Small Endeavor is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Why do people commit themselves to the things they do? Why are people so worried about sport? Why wine? Why video games? I'm Brian Lowry, and in this season of my podcast, Know What You See, I'm asking a simple question, but a really big one. What's the point? In conversations with people with a variety of passions and obsessions, we get the chance to look through a window and see what it means to truly focus on a realm of human experience. Join me on Know What You See. New episodes begin November 26th.
Hello friends, Lee Seacamp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor and our unabridged interview with celebrity chef Jacques Pépin. After interviewing Jacques, I found myself with several tangible takeaways. One, I started simply paying more attention to what I do on those occasions when I do cook, to be more present to my cooking, to be present to what is in the kitchen and who is in the kitchen with me. And second, paying more attention to the way in which cooking is such a communal endeavor, that even though one may be alone in the kitchen, one is doing an exercise in community if one considers it and frames it aright. Jacques Pépin is a celebrated chef, grew up in France, then moved as a boy, 17-year-old later, to Paris, increasingly making his way into the world of celebrated French cooking. He served 3 French heads of state as a young chef and then made his way to New York City. Then was offered a job later to become the chef for President John F. Kennedy at the White House. As he says, even though he's a Democrat, he turned it down and instead took a job with the restaurant chain Howard Johnson's. And so it's a fascinating story, and he went on to do a lot of amazing work as an author, as a teacher, as a college professor, and as a celebrated television chef, along with his dear friend Julia Childs. Remarkable interview, fascinating story, and I hope you enjoy this with Jacques Pépin. We are most delighted to announce that we're taking No Small Endeavor on the road this April. We'll be bringing our acclaimed variety show to cities across the country with special guests like Malcolm Gladwell, the New York Times bestselling author of The Tipping Point, and award-winning musician and songwriter Drew Holcomb, along with a killer band from Nashville. It will be a most outstanding evening of music, conversation, and big ideas. We'll be in Indianapolis, Louisville, Grand Rapids, Baltimore, Greensboro, Columbus, and Reading. I would love for you to join us. Details and tickets at nosmallendeavor.com/events. Again, that's nosmallendeavor.com/events. Here on No Small Endeavor, we are all about breaking down false dichotomies, and in numerous episodes, we've explored the false dichotomy many of us have inherited between science and faith. That's why we're pleased to tell you about a new book called How Can Your Faith Fuel Scientific Discovery? It's a thought-provoking resource for young adults exploring careers in STEM. It offers a fresh perspective on how faith and scientific inquiry can go hand in hand, helping the next generation see science not just as a career, but as a calling. Encourage the young scientist in your life with this inspiring read. Again, that title is How Can Your Faith Fuel Scientific Discovery? Get your copy now at blueprint1543.com or on amazon.com. Today, we're honored to welcome Jacques Pépin, culinary icon with a career spanning over 7 decades. Born in France, trained in the kitchens of Paris, Jacques went on to serve as a personal chef to 3 French heads of state, including Charles de Gaulle. After moving to the U.S., he's made waves as an author with over 30 books to his name, as well as a beloved television personality, starring alongside his friend Julia Child in the Emmy-winning Julia and Jacques Cooking at Home. He's a recipient of France's highest civilian honor and the James Beard Foundation Lifetime Achievement Award, making him a true legend in the world of food. Welcome, Monsieur.
You sure it's me?
Okay. That's what I read about you and see about you. So yes, so it's an honor to have you with us. I must say, even though you were raised as a country boy, it sounds like in France.
Yes.
I'm a little intimidated. You know, I'm from Alabama. And we get a little intimidated by European culture, especially Frenchmen for some reason. So I don't know. So I'm feeling a little skittish, and
I am considered maybe the quintessential French chef here. And then I have like a 30-some book, and you open one book, page 32, and you see a black bean soup with banana and cilantro on top. My wife being born in New York from a Puerto Rican mother and a Cuban father, and then you'll have a lobster roll from Connecticut, or a clam chowder from New England. So I'm probably the quintessential American chef now, over half a century here.
So it sounds like we'll be okay. We'll be okay then.
All
yes.
right, good.
Yeah. Well, I would love to start back in some of the stories you tell in your memoir about being raised in the days of World War II, and some of the experiences you had as a young boy, including even your home's apartment building being bombed at one point.
Yes. I mean, what we have to realize, I had two brothers, one 16 months older, one 4 years younger, was born in 1940, just at the end of. So we didn't realize, really. I mean, this is the way life was. We never had any other type of life. So my father left to go into the resistance, and my mother was a waitress in a restaurant. At that time, we didn't have, of course, television. We didn't have radio. We didn't have the telephone. We didn't have any of this. So, yeah, I think it was in 41 or 2, the first time the house was bombed, because we were, the reason was what we were next to the railroad station, a big railroad station. So, so my mother was working. We were with my grandmother at the garden. That's where we spent most of the time, at the garden. When the house was bombed, well, we moved with some cousin, but my father would not be aware of that. So occasionally he sneak into town to bring some kind of sardine or something like that for us. So he can rush there. He look, the house is gone. So he didn't. So he had to find out that some cousin. And the second time, it was bombed by the American this time. When they were bombing again, I don't know. So the same thing. And the third time was the German, when they left, again, blow everything in the back. So, but each time, the poor man would get there and the family is gone. And he has to find us somewhere. So that's, it's interesting to realize our life was different without telephone, without radio, so all of those things which we knew from the war, from the concentration camp and all that, we had no awareness of that. It would come later.
You would even be sent away during the summers from your home?
During the summer?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, we spent, usually in a farm somewhere. My mother would always find us a farm to go in to spend a couple of months out of the summer, because she knew there we would have milk, butter, or whatever. Chicken, rabbit, and so forth.
How do you suspect that those very early experiences, even though, as you said, you didn't know any different, but how do you suspect through your life those early childhood experiences shaped the person you have become?
Well, certainly I'm a very, very miserly cook. I never throw anything out. I always kind of redo it. My father would never have thrown a piece of bread out. If he did, he would kiss it first. And when he throw it out, he throw it to the chicken anyway. It's not... So, yes, food was very important. So for me, I always look at people and how much... When I had people working for me in the kitchen, I look at that, at the economy of motion, as well as the economy in the food, and so forth. Rather, I have seen some chefs which have a great dish or whatever, but the whole kitchen look like a disaster area. There is enough left over for like 2 days. So that's not great cooking. Great cooking is something which is not only good, but economical, well done, with economy of time, economy of motion, economy of ingredient, and so forth.
Do you think that in addition to or beyond you being a miserly cook, to use your phrase, that there were other important attitudes, or even on the negative side, fears, anxieties that came from those early years?
I don't know. I mean, I was in the kitchen by the time I was 6, 7 years old. Anyway, my mother had that little restaurant, and my two brothers and I helped. So that was part of who we were. And at that time when we came back from school, no one asked you whether you did your homework or not. If I had come into the kitchen, or look at my father would grab me and say, "I need you to wash those bottles or this or that." So, I mean, I would never have come home and say, "I am bored." I said, "You're what? Are you kidding?" So, no, we try to escape rather than.
What other kind of memories do you have from those early days of being? Because I think like immediately after the war, was that when your mother first started her first restaurant?
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so what are some of your memories of those early days in working with the family in the restaurants?
This has stayed with me probably. I mean, the memory of what you eat when you are very small. Also, the fact that when we came back from school, usually we end up in the kitchen, sitting in a corner doing homework. And so hearing the noise of the kitchen, the smell of the kitchen, voice of my mother, those are very visceral memory, who stay with you the rest of your life. And I try to give some of that to my daughter and to my granddaughter too. I mean, she's at BU now. She's in the third year. But when she was 6, 7 years old, she came home. I put a stool next to me at the stove, and I said, "Okay, give me that salad. You think it's clean?" And I would say, "I need parsley. Let's go to the garden." The gardener said, that's not parsley, that's chive. No, taste it, that's tarragon, that's parsley, that's chive. We came back, sit next to me, I said, "Okay, wash the salad, give it to me." And, that type of platform, if you want, to establish a relationship carried on to the table. Of course, by the time we finished the food, we ate the food and we discussed the food. And that led to other conversation about school or about other things. So, that idea of cooking, food, being together, smelling, have always been with me. I mean, and the family. As I said, Proust developed his theory of the affective memory, that is, the memory of the senses, the eye, look, the smell, the touch, the taste, the smell. And those memory are very visceral, and they are very powerful, and they are very immediate, as opposed to the memory of the brain. When I say, "Where was I in 1967, whatever?" I have to think for a while to find out. But if I walk in the wood with my dog and I smell mushroom, right away I'm 6, 7, 8 years old with my brother and my father looking for mushroom in the wood. So they are the affective memory, and that for me is very important.
Yeah, that's very helpful. How would you encourage? I can imagine someone listening and thinking, realizing their own insufficiency in affective memory. How would you encourage someone to begin to cultivate a more attuned affective memory?
As I said, when the kid goes to school, when he comes back to school, it should be next to you, whatever you do, and he can do whatever, or she can do whatever she wants in a corner. But they smell, if they are in the kitchen, they smell the food, they hear the sound, and they don't even realize it. But it become very important. It transcends. I mean, what does a kid? A kid goes to, when they go to war, a kid 20 years old, 25 years old in Afghanistan or somewhere in the world, and they go, what do they dream of at night? They dream of food. Their mother clam chowder, or their father fried chicken, or whatever. And at that point, those memory of food transcend the level of just a nourishing factor. It become home. It become love. It become security. It becomes that. So very often, those food memory turn into that type of thing for everybody. I would cook with Korean people or with anyone, and sometime when I was in Africa as well as in China, sometimes food I say that's terrible. So, but it's totally different. My palate is different than the kid who was raised there would put that food that she or he had since he was born is very visceral and very powerful. So very often when we see, especially in America, because there is no place in the world like America or New York for the amount of restaurants, the amount of diversity that you have there. And the first time you have something that people, like I have a friend of mine who always make rice, he's Iranian, and he make that rice with burning the bottom of it so that there is a crust in the bottom.
Huh.
But basically, it doesn't put any salt or anything in it. For any meal, it has that. Like for me, I tested. I never told him that, but I mean, but on the other hand, I cannot sit down without a basket of bread on the table. For me, I don't even think of it. It's part of the whole meal. Whether I eat potato or pasta, I have bread. It's like a security blanket. So yes.
Out of this rich experience as a child, you say by the time you were 13 that you wanted to be a chef?
Yes, I mean, I think the choice was pretty easy at the time. Remember, my father was a cabinet maker by trade. My mother was a cook by trade. As I say, we had no telephone, we had nothing. So I never thought even that I could be, a doctor or a lawyer. I mean, my father, my brother, older brother, continued in school. Especially in France, you don't have to pay in school. If you pass the exam, you go on and on. So he became an engineer. But for me, I didn't want the kitchen. I got excited in the kitchen, the noise, the sound. So I left home to go into apprenticeship. Yeah, at 13 years old. And at that time, we had no day off. So we worked 7 days a week. And at the end of the month, we got 4 days off for the month. So at that time, I could take the bus to go home, to bring my mother my clothes, my equipment, the sheet of my bed, everything for her to clean. And we were not paid, especially maybe the first year and a half. And after we start getting a little bit of money. Yeah. But we learn.
Yeah.
Without recipe too.
Yeah. It sounds as if those early years of being an apprentice were quite demanding.
Yes, it was in some ways, but remember that it was a different way of looking at food that we do now. Certainly at that time, the cook was at the bottom of the social scale, and you were a cook, that's it. And now we are genius. I mean, I don't know what happened. I mean, I'm not complaining, but certainly, yes, a good mother would have wanted her child to marry a doctor, a lawyer, certainly not a cook. So, but things have changed a great deal in that way. But also, at that time, the idea of learning was to conform. So anywhere that you work, I work in many, many restaurants, you're not complaining. You're not trying to do your own food in that restaurant. You cut the tomato this way. You would never have thought of cutting them the other way. You would have said, well, why did you do that? So you go there. You go there and learn by imitating and by conforming to the food there. At the Plaza Athénée in Paris, for example, we were 48 cooks in the kitchen. It was a big, and one of the most famous dishes was the lobster soufflé. So I'm sure the 48 chefs could have done, or cook there could have done the lobster soufflé. You would never have known which one had done it. And that was the idea. And that's what I kind of advise young chefs to do. If you want to work somewhere, if you work to Daniel Boulou in New York, you're not going to tell him what to do. You go there, you smell, you look, you say, yes, chef, and you do it exactly the way it's there. Whether it coincides with your sense of aesthetic or with your sense of taste, it's immaterial. You do it this way. And then after a year or two, you move to another chef and do the same thing again. And maybe a third one again. And by that time, you have acquired, or amassed an enormous amount of material in different way. And that's the time when you start filtering through your sense of taste, through your sense of aesthetic, and doing your own stuff. You cannot escape yourself anyway. So at some point you have to do who you are.
This is fascinating to me in terms of just the sense of craft that I hear you saying things I hear other people in other craft trades or craft vocations point to, and that is that there's a sort of place that simply requires a deep formation and where you have to learn the fundamentals well. Perhaps before thinking about being creative, before thinking about making a contribution, there's a sort of being schooled into a craft. And as well, there's sometimes this conversation about, and I can't remember if I read this in you or I made this up that I read this somewhere in you, that there's a sort of joy alongside being schooled into the craft. But I don't know, commentary on that?
Yes, I mean, certainly, one of the first book I did was La Technique, which is an illustrated book of cooking. Very often, even at that time, I didn't even do recipe. I just show you how to get there. And that is to bone out a chicken, to tie it up, and that's okay. Now you can saute it, do whatever you want with it. So the technique were very important. They are still very important. When it's 11 o'clock in the morning and you have 100 people sitting down at 12 o'clock, well, you better move your ass. I mean, yeah, it's a question of speed there. So the technique, it's repeat, so that you can do it without even looking at it, very fast slicing and so forth, so that you can achieve it. And this is absolutely essential for a professional chef, not really for a home cook. The home cook, well, it takes some of the drudgery out of cooking if you can go very fast and good the technique. But now it doesn't make necessarily a great cook. I know a fair amount of chefs, little restaurant here and there, who the food is good, the food is fine, and they do a good food cost, they do, so they're a good restaurant. So they're a very good technician, but relatively lousy cook. The food is all right. But when you talk about someone like Thomas Keller and all that, per se in New York and so forth, not only the chef has to be trained and with the speed and all that, that is a good technician, but then he brings something else. After that, he brings, imagination and talent and all that, and take the food and bring it to a higher level.
Huh. It sounds as if all along you were quite, while in the midst of the discipline and the demands of that apprenticeship, you also enjoyed yourself a great deal, and also often enjoyed a bit of prankstering.
Yeah, that happened all the time.
Yeah. It sounds like sometimes it got you in a little bit of trouble.
Sometimes it gets you into trouble. Yes, yeah. Right. I mean, people are cooking with eggs, doing an omelette, and you sneak some hard-cooked eggs in their safe, so they try to break the egg. So, there is many things like that we do. But yes, it's true that in the kitchen, we're all equal. So in many ways, we have fun. You cannot cook indifferently. You have to give some of yourself in the cooking process. So there is a great amount of love who goes into it, without people often realizing it. Yeah.
You end up going to Paris after your apprenticeship?
Yes.
What was this experience like for you, coming from, as it sounds like from your memoir, you're moving from a relatively small town, modest, never been to the big city, and then moving into the high culture of Paris. What was this like for you you were what, 16, 17?
At that time, yeah. Well, after I finished my apprenticeship, I did the season that we call the season in Aix-les-Bains. That is, hotel which is open only for the 4 months of the summer season. And there is no day off. You work the whole. So that was my first experience. And I worked in a small restaurant near Lyon. And at 17 and a half maybe, I said I have to go to Paris. So I told my mother that I had a job there too, which I didn't have, or a place. Get my suitcase, get onto the train, and went to Paris. And I had the letter of a friend I was in apprenticeship with, a guy, so I had his address. So I carried my suitcase for a mile or whatever before I found his address. Then he put me on for the night, and I slept on the floor because he had a girlfriend there. And anyway, and then a couple of days later, I went to La Société in France, in Paris particularly, we have La Société des Cuisiniers de Paris, that is Society of the Chef of Paris. And you go there, and according to who you are at that point, at level you are in the cooking, they place you in different places. So this is a great organization, actually. I work at the Plaza Athénée for like 6-7 years. I work at Meurice. I work in 2 or 3 restaurants for a few months, but my day off, I went to La Société and get a day off or 2 days off working in different restaurants. So I probably work in maybe 100 restaurants in Paris, from like, the super, big place where you serve like 3,000 people a day, where you don't know before you get there. They send you, and then you get there, and all I did was put a sleeve of a leaf of letters between each plate with a cooked eggs on top of it. That was at the Galerie Lafayette in France, which is a big store. So you learn. Sometimes you end up in great restaurants, sometimes in small restaurants. This is a great training because you're there for the day. So it's not like you say, I'm going to take a day to see what they are doing here and so forth. No, you got to start working right away. So, yes, at that time, but as I said, at that time, the cook was low on the social scale. So we went out at night. You go out to invite a girl to dance. She said, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a cook." That didn't really go very far. So it was, it was another world. But I stayed in Paris for almost 7 years, 8 years. And during that time, I was called in the army. I mean, I was drafted actually in the Navy because it was mandatory drafting. And it was during the war in Algeria. And my brother, who is 16 months older, was already in Algeria. So when they drafted me, I did my time, training, so forth. And after, all of a sudden, they sent me back to Paris because what happened at the time during the war in Algeria, there had been a family who had like 3 or 4 boys, all drafted. They all got killed. So they decided that for the drafted one, not for the one who professional, but for the drafted one, one brother was there, the other one had to come back before the other one goes. So I was sent back to Paris. That was the reason. So I ended up with the admiral, the officer and so forth. And that's why I ended up eventually at la présidence du Conseil, the Prime Minister resistance. Under the Fourth Republic, the government were changing at a relatively rapid pace in France. So I was the chef there under 3 governments, including de Gaulle, at the end for about, de Gaulle came to the 12th of May, 58, so I was with him a year or something like that, yes.
Fascinating.
With Madame de Gaulle, who called me Petit Jacques, So. And that's it. I was there between 56 and 58 for 2 years with the government, and not once ever will someone. I served like I don't know where, Nehru, Tito, Macmillan, those were the head of state at the time, which I served. Not anyone once would call you to get kudo in the dining room. Are you kidding? That didn't exist at all. The cook was in the kitchen too. I never had an interview. Well, television barely existed, but on radio, or newspaper, or a magazine, or no, never once. That didn't exist. It was so. It was really another world for the cook. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then you decided at some point to go to New York City, not long after?
Yes, at the end of 1959. Yes. So
what leads you to New York?
Well, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I love America, jazz, from Louis Armstrong to Ella Fitzgerald. So I said, I want to go to America for a year. So I'm free. A year, maybe 2 years. So at that time, it was very easy to... at that time, because the quota for immigration and all that were by a country at that time. And the French never really immigrated that much. So the quota was never really full. I was six weeks. I had a green card, I could come here.
Huh.
And they changed those rules in the 80s or whatever, making all group of European country together. But at that time, so it was very easy. So I came here. I came on a student boat, actually, was coming back from Europe, all American students. And I ended up in Quebec. I took the train there, at Montreal, rather. I took the train and came to New York with my suitcase. And I had met someone in New York, actually at the Plaza Athénée, the pastry chef say, "Oh, I have heard of mine coming next week, visiting from New York. He had a restaurant in New York. I want you to meet him. You're interested in going there?" I say, "Sure." So I met him, and so he became my sponsor. So I get out of Grand Central in New York and walk to his place, which was on 50th Street, and that's it. And the day after, I went to the pavilion. Pierre Fred told me, "When do you want to start?" Well, so that's it. I had a job right away.
Wow.
So,
yeah, remarkable. And so how old were you when you came to New York?
24, something like that.
Okay, yeah. What's your first impressions of the United States in that 24-year-old eyes?
It was very exciting in many ways, and I got used to the food and the freedom and the food in the street. It was full winter and the incredible blue sky of New York in really cold weather, and the week after I was here, I took the subway. Someone explained to me, and I went to Columbia University, and there I somehow, through my very broken English, I find someone to speak with and enrolled into English for foreign students. So that's it. And then it was a couple of years, I think, English for foreign students. Then I had to do some validation program for a year or two because I never went to high school or anything like this. And then eventually I was accepted to get a BA and a master and so forth. So it took a long time, but it was fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I loved it. And there's a certain freedom in New York that I could feel that I didn't feel the same way in Europe, so in the food and in the way, and people were extremely welcoming at that time, probably more than now. They say, "Oh my God, you come from a good country to what?" So they were, yes, very, very welcoming. So I felt really at home. The food world was very, very small at the time. Within a year, I met James Beard and Helen, through Helen McCauley, was the food editor of McCall, House Beautiful. And she lived next to, not too far, a block from where I was in New York. So I met Craig Claiborne, who started at the New York Times. At that time, he started at the New York Times, and he came to review the restaurants, and I was there, and we became friends. He introduced me to Helen Winter, and introduced me to James Beard because she spoke with him every day, and eventually to Julia Child a few months later. So within like a year I was here, I knew the trinity of cooking in America. James Beard, Julia Child, and Craig Claiborne. So it was really a small world at the time, compared to now, the food world,
Hey there, friends. If intellectually honest conversations pique your interest, or you simply enjoy having your mind changed, then you should check out The Gist, the longest-running and chart-topping daily news and commentary podcast. Hosted by journalist Mike Pesca, who frequently appears on MSNBC and the PBS NewsHour, The Gist covers everything from breaking news and politics to sports and entertainment, all from Mike's pragmatic, centrist point of view. Not to mention, you'll hear from guests like former Obama speechwriter Ben Rhodes, Massachusetts Congressman Seth Moulton, and Academy Award-nominated actor Jesse Eisenberg. My favorite part, after most interviews Mike conducts, the guest says something like, "Whoa, you actually read my book!" So go ahead, follow The Gist on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening now. Yeah, that's remarkable. But that seems to be a thread that I saw running throughout your memoir, is that there's this constant sense of community and community developing. Do you think that let me see how to ask this question. So with all of the kind of community, the mentors, the friendships that you develop in your craft, is there something about the way you went about it, do you think, that made this easier to facilitate, or was there something about that day and time that made it easier to facilitate, or both, or something else?
Maybe both. However, food is a great equalizer. And when you start talking about food with people, the difference kind of disappeared very often. The motto of our foundation now is like everyone looks the same in the eye of the stove, or something like this. So, and it's true. At that time, food is a great equalizer. This way, I ended up cooking at Craig Claiborne's house many, many times. So in the kitchen, everyone is the same. There is no, I even did my wedding at Craig in his house. He did my wedding in East Hampton. And I was cooking actually an hour before with René Verdon, who was the chef at the White House, and Pierre Frenet and Roger Fessaguet. Go get changed, you're getting married. So yeah, the food bring people together, a great deal, and that's what happened here too. And there is, especially now in our time of polarization, there is no, no political consideration in food, or racial implication, or gender implication, or whatever. So food, yes, is a great equalizer this way.
Maybe I'm overthinking this, but it strikes me that I don't really talk about food very much to the people around me. When we have a meal, if one of my family members cooks something, we'll always compliment or say thank you or say what we like. But it seems to me that you and your friends have a different kind of level of thinking about, talking about, engaging with life through food.
Yeah, but we don't really talk about food much. We have a big group here of playing boule. Boule is pétanque in France, which is next to like bocce ball, for the Italian too. And there is 2 or 3 chefs in it, but otherwise we have like 50 people, and we meet basically every week, all the time. But cooking together and eating together, whether you talk about it or not, or you may talk about, so how did you do that or this, that too. But otherwise, as I said, the food brings people together. We have doctors, we have lawyers, we have all kind of people in that group of friends. And that group of friends is very, very important for us. I'm cooking tonight with a friend who is coming here. So, yes, but we don't really talk about the food itself. We talk about life or what's going on or this and that. Yeah.
So after you're in the U.S., so two questions I want to ask about the U.S. Coming to the U.S., you've already drawn some comparisons and contrast between the U.S. and France, your social, cultural experiences. But any other sort of comparisons or contrasts that stood out to you as you came to the U.S.?
Yes, as I said, the way people were opening, open, and also, as I say, I love the food in the street, hot dog, and at that time they had the chestnut and all that at night. That's what I want. But also the fact that the restaurant themselves were very versatile in some way. But there was only great restaurants were French at the time. All supposedly French, continental type of thing with the menu always in French, usually totally misspelled. And but there was no great Italian restaurant, Chinese, Japanese, and all at that time. The thing in the New York Times, the restaurant were kind of continental restaurant, 4-star, 3-star, 2-star. Now they were. You go to Chinatown, you get great food. You went there next to Chinatown, Little Italy, we had great food, Italian food too. But in the registry or here, it was never it was never considered a great 3-star, 4-star restaurant until, well, a number of years ago now. Now there are extraordinary 3-star, 4-star restaurants, Chinese, Japanese, Italian, too. In fact, there is much less French than it used to be. You know? So,
Yeah.
so I learned, I don't think that I was very, I've never been, so taken with, French cooking too. Of course, that's what I learned too. But I could really absorb any other type of cooking without feeling, when my mother came and after a few years there, and she thought what I was doing was great. I cooked some dish and she said, it's not French, but it's really good. It's really, I never thought really of being only French and keeping to this, except maybe for the technique. The technique kind of remained there, but the technique are nothing, without the food itself to express those techniques.
Yeah. So another kind of way the way you're thinking about cooking and culture seems to be highlighted in a major turning point in your life where you're given the option to become the chef for President John F. Kennedy at the White House, or to take a job with Howard Johnson's, the great chain of restaurants in the 1960s, 70s.
Yes.
And you choose the latter. You choose to go with Howard Johnson's as opposed to becoming the chef for President Kennedy. So lead us into that decision, that discernment for you.
And I'm a Democrat too.
Yeah.
But the point is that remember that I don't think I really realized the potential, because as I said before, having been with President in France, I've never been on radio, television, or anything like this. So I had a new friend in New York. I was going to Colombia. I had a new bunch of friends. I didn't want to start all over again in Washington, D.C., So that was, to be truthful, that was one of the reason. And then Howard Johnson was a client of the Pavilion. So he hired Pierre Freinet, who was the executive chef, and I went with Pierre. So it was a new world for me, learning about American eating habits and production, marketing, chemistry of food, making a recipe, and so forth. I had never done that before, so it was something totally new. In fact, I worked there from 1960 to 1970, 10 years. And after that, I opened a restaurant in New York called La Potagerie, between 45 46th Street, which was a high production of soup. We serve 800 people a day or something like that.
Wow.
To a soup, a piece of cheese, an apple. That was our meal for $3.75, I think, at the time. Whatever. So then I was a consultant at the Russian Tea Room at the time. And then I opened the World Trade Center with Joe Baum, where we ended up serving 30,000 people a day from the main commissary. I'm saying that to say I would never have been able to do that with my knowledge of French cooking and all that, because I didn't know about mass production, marketing, chemistry of food, large production, and so forth. So I learned a great deal at Howard Johnson, without any question, more than I would have learned at the White House.
Yeah. After a number of years in the U.S., another major turning point. You have a major car accident.
Yes, that was in '74. Yes.
Yeah. What kind of, first maybe tell us a little bit about the accident, and then kind of what the implications were of that for your career.
Well, it was '74. Actually, I was in tennis clothes. I played tennis for 2-3 hours that day, and I was coming back home. That was upstate New York in the Catskill at Hunter Mountain. I was probably going way too fast with my car, and a deer jumped, and I avoided. I fall in the ravine, and fortunately break a telephone pole with the electricity of the motel. So they came out, and otherwise I would have died there. I had 12 fractures, so I was really damaged, and I crawled through the window, and the car started burning. So anyway, at that time my wife signed for the removal of my left arm, which was totally crushed. Good thing I had a good surgeon. They said, no, let's try to save it.
Mm.
I mean, I can't extend it completely, but it's good. And that I end up, and I broke, I broke my not only my pelvis in 5 places and different but I have a drop foot as I break one of the bone in the back, and so it was, thinking slowly coming back, really learning how to walk and so forth. I knew that I couldn't really go back into the kitchen 12 hours a day behind the stove. So I had already started with Helen McCullough, to write recipe and doing this and that. I was, yes, at that point, way ahead at Columbia in the graduate school. So I decided to start writing about food. And coincidentally, at that time, not too long after, there was Women Liberation, Organic Garden, Health Food Store, and then those tiny store, food equipment or store where, they had a little cooking school in the back and selling, food equipment. And so I started giving classes there. And it was very easy for me. Give a couple of classes of an hour, a couple of hours class. And I ended up doing like close to 40 weeks of class a year, from East Coast to West Coast, as those shop were, up and from East to West, I did. And usually when I did there for a week, 10 class or whatever, 2 classes a day, they would say, okay, can we put you on the schedule for next year? So it became my main way of living to a certain extent. And that's where the technique came about also, because I peel a carrot and people say, wow, that's how you peel a carrot? I said, yes. I didn't know there was any. So I said, okay, fine, I'm going to show those basic technique of crushing garlic, peeling a carrot, poaching an egg, boiling out a chicken, and so forth. So that's how I started doing those recipes. So I think that technique came out in 1975. And it was a fairly large book. I have 1,500 pictures of inside, black and white. But I had the center, a center chapter with all of the finished dishes in color and so forth. And they kept that in the first edition. And the second edition, they removed that. Was too expensive. So most of the time I would finish a dish, a chicken, and I say, okay, for the finished dish, look at page such and such for the color picture. Well, it wasn't there anymore. And then never remove the place where it was written, look at page such and such for this. So it was kind of weird.
So we need to all go look for the first edition.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So,
but you had during this time, you alluded to this a moment ago. So you come to the U.S. You had never been in high school in France. So you take these courses in English as a second language. Then you kind of get into. You do the work you need to do to get into a bachelor's degree program at Columbia University, and then you go on and take a master's and even most of your work for a PhD?
Yes, basically my PhD I had done all of the requirement, and they refused my doctoral dissertation. So I said, well, I have enough anyway. After all those years I was involved in doing other things, I should have continued doing it. I mean, my doctoral dissertation, I wanted to do a dissertation on food and culture and cooking, of course. So food in the context of civilization literature, So, I mean, you can find that in the Greek, certainly in the Greek poet, as well as in the 17th century in France, from Voltaire to. So it was an interesting subject, but at that time, it was the people were not interested in this. And eventually, in the 80s, in the mid-80s, Julia Child and I was teaching at Boston University at that time, and she was too. She lived in Boston, so we started cooking together, and we wrote to Silbert, the president of BU, they said we should do something with food, and we wanted to do it undergraduate, and he didn't want. He wanted, so we ended up doing a master of liberal art with a concentration in gastronomy. This is still going on. I'll be there next week anyway, teaching there. So this was kind of new, here. And since then, there is many book has been written about food and culture and history and so forth. But when I proposed that at Columbia, it was too early. They say, food? Are you kidding? That's not serious. Food. All right, fine.
Fascinating. Julia Child, so you ended up doing quite a bit of work with her and developing a friendship with her?
Yes, as I said, I met her through Helen Macaulay in 1961, I believe, something like that, or 60. And Helen told me, I have someone sent me a book, because she was the full editor of Macaulay. It was beautiful. So they sent me a book to review. I want you to look at it. So I looked. It was Mastering the Art of French Cooking. And I said, that's pretty good. Well, it's great. So she said, well, she's coming to New York next month. You want to cook? I said, sure. So she said she's a very tall woman with a terrible voice, but okay. So Julia came, and we actually spoke French, mostly my first, because she just came back from living in France several years, and I wasn't here that long. So we became friends, and we stayed friends basically for half a century.
There's a famous Saturday Night Live sketch
yes,
with
right.
Dan Aykroyd that I think has some relevance to you.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. I don't know if it has, but she loved it. She was talking about that cut her finger, fall on the floor, and the blood all over the place too. And I know I was with her a couple of weeks after that. We were in California, and we were cooking together. And we went on Catherine Grosby's show, the wife of Bing Crosby. We were she was on Johnny Carson's show. All they talk about was her finger, because at that point we weren't yet. I was giving classes with her, and we were in Washington, and we did a thing. And I said, "Have you ever been to Jean-Louis Paladin at what is the hotel where they did the book on Nixon?
You talking about Watergate?
Yeah, the Watergate. So at the Watergate Hotel, Jean-Louis Paladin, a friend of mine, was a great chef, died many years ago, and she said, "No, I never been there." I said, "Okay, let's go there tonight." She said, "Great." So we were on the show with. I forget all the name. After 11 o'clock at night with what the show I was on with. Anyway, so we were there. He called me. I did show with him in New York, and he called me. He was in Los Angeles at that point. When our show, he said, you want to do the show? Do you think that Julia would be interested? I said, sure. So I called her, and she happened to be in California. She was born there, so. I said, can you do it? She said, yes. I was on a book tour. Yes, so it was 78, something like that. I was on a book tour. So at that time, I had a knife with me because, I go from one town to the other, and you do the morning show on television. And I said, what kind of equipment you have? They said, we have a plug. Okay, fine. I said, at least I had a knife, so I could take a tomato and make a rose out of tomato to find. So anyway, I joined Julia for that show, and I guess my plane was already a bit late, so they were waiting for me, rushed me to the studio, and Julia was there. She had bought more food than you would ever be able to consume, a rack of lamb too. So she had, and she said, "Come look at the thing." Oh, it was Tom Snyder's show. Tom Snyder. So on Tom Snyder, I look at the show, I put my knife on the table. There it was 5 minutes before we start. She took the knife to cut something and take the end of her finger off. And a piece, about a quarter of an inch like that. Ooh. So I grab it, I push it back, I tighten it with a string at the time, and she was mad at herself. She said, I don't want to mention that. I don't want to talk about it. I said, okay. So, and Tom Snyder said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? I said, we're not going to do anything. Julia will talk. We'll talk with her. I'll cook with her. She said, okay. So we opened the show. Julia is in the middle. and she looked. Tom Snyder was 6'7", and Julia was 6'2" or 6'3". So she said, "We are by other side." I said, "Yes," and that's why Tom said, "I'm 6'6" or 6'7", and she said, "I'm 5". So she said, "How tall are you?" I said, "I'm 4'9", or whatever. So we start. That was the first. The second line, Tom Snyder said, "Julia, do you mind if I tell people you cut your finger?" Well, so the camera, of course, concentrates on her finger, and the day after she was on Johnny Carson, all they talk about was her finger. And I was on that show with Catherine Grosby, we were making omelette together. All they talk about was her finger. So then what's his name? Saturday Night Live did that sketch of it.
It's a very funny sketch. So you meet your wife Gloria many years ago, over 50 years ago.
Yes.
And so I wonder, in all those years for you, I would imagine being the spouse of a professional chef could cause tension in the kitchen. But what was that like for you?
Well, no, Gloria was a very good cook, but again, too. So no, my wife was not to be impressed at all, I come into the kitchen, if I come, she's cooking, I come into the kitchen. It's not like she say, "Darling, could you help me?" She would say, "Don't touch anything." That would be the reaction more than anything else. So, yeah, so I learned. Of course, if you open your mind, you already learn with people, as I say, arroz con pollo and different type of, Spanish or Puerto Rican dishes and so forth. Yeah.
She passed away recently in 2020?
2020, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Almost 4 years ago.
Yeah. What are there surprising recurring memories that come to you as you have been in your time of grief, or
all the time?
All the time.
Life is different.
Yeah.
50 years, at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we had an aperitif, and then cooking at 6:30 or 7, we sit down and eat and have a bottle of wine. So now by myself, it's quite different.
Yeah. Surprising things that you like to eat?
I am a glutton. Basically, I eat anything you put in front of me. Everything that I don't like as much, for example, I did a tart a couple of days ago. I didn't put any cinnamon in it. Well, a little bit of cinnamon is fine, but when I came here and learning about a regular apple pie, which I love, but too much cinnamon, for me, I was not used to that. So, a few things like that I'm not crazy about, but I don't really have any big taboo about anything in food.
I think I saw that you especially like Oreos and maybe even Jell-O.
Oh, yeah, I like Jell-O. I mean, that was great. And an Oreo cookie, too. Yes. I remember when I first came in, I went to Pierre Freinet, who was my chef at the Pavilion, to his house in East Hampton. He had started doing a little cottage out. And then he had 2 kids, two daughters. One was 6 or 7, and the other one like 10 or something about. And then in the morning, his wife came and gave those, where you had the cornflake. You had the cornflake, the whole series of little package of cornflake that you open, you pour the meat.
Oh, yes, the little small packages, yeah.
Right. So I thought that was fantastic. That was really great. Crunchy, nice, cold milk. So, yes, that's what I learned. A few of the first tasted that revelation here for me.
So I have kind of, as we begin to close, two final questions. The first one is, I wonder if you would share with us a bit, after all these years of good work and joy and friendships and mentoring and cooking and living life and loving a wife for 50 years and all of those gifts, if you would maybe give us a little commentary on wisdom and foolishness. That is, what's been some of the important lessons and wisdom that have been really important to you, and or what have been some of the lessons, hard lessons you had to learn to get there?
Well, certainly, food is a great equalizer, and through all of those years, being with friends, cooking, it's important. I mean, for me, the secret of life is if you if you can make a living out of something you love to do, but you never have to go to work. So this was very important, and I did, and I never took a job for money. Uh, Ever. I took a job because I was interested in that. I don't want to say that I'm a great, but yes. So this do what you feel like doing and do what you love to do. That's very important. Working with friends, and along the way, of course, sometimes you go too far in one way or the other, and but life has usually a way of bringing you down, very bad, and so you realize that. Sometimes you're an idiot. So, challenge. I mean, I was always for change and a little thing, adapting and so forth. You have to respect people, whoever they are in the kitchen, which is certainly different now than when I was an apprentice, where you get kicked in the rear end and all that, yelled at, which was part of the tradition. Now, this is not the right way to teach people how to cook. So certainly for me, I'm not like that show on television where people are fighting and all that too. I mean, I know it's television, you have to do it, but for me, this is not the way to teach people, because you have to bring a lot of love in what you are doing there. So, you have to be more gentle with the people. It doesn't mean that you have no discipline and the kitchen has to be organized and disciplined. And that's important. But there is a way of doing it without antagonizing and yelling at people.
Yeah. Thank you. Last question. You tell how after you had been through your first year as an apprentice, I think perhaps you're 14, and the chef, he would always call you kid. What's that? Petit?
Yeah, petit. Yeah.
He would always call you kid, and then that day he calls you by your name, and he promotes you to begin working at the stove.
At the stove.
and you say this. You say, if I'd earned those well-earned sentiments, they were overcome by another more powerful feeling, one that would become a familiar companion throughout my life: doubt. And I was intrigued by that, because I don't see the doubt in the rest of the book, but you kind of give us this glimpse into one of your vulnerabilities, I suppose, at that point. But any comments about that?
Yes, I panned I have panning from 1961 too, so very often I have more knowledge of cooking than panning, especially technique-wise. But I get into a panning, I don't know where I'm going very often. So you have that. But eventually, if you work on it, usually the panning take a hold of me at some point, and then now I react to it. I just react and so forth. And a little bit the same thing in food. Less and less as you are coming more technically knowledgeable. You go to the stove, you know that the chicken has to be done this way. You taste, you adjust, and you don't even realize often. If I work in a restaurant and the specialty is, let's say, a chicken with morel sauce, well, okay, I may do 12 during that evening, 12 order of this. If someone were taping me, they will realize that 12 time, I didn't do it the same way once. It's close to, but not the same way. But this is unconscious. The chicken is that thick, the breast of chicken. The next one is thinner, because so you automatically adjust to. You cook with gas, electric, or cast iron, or whatever. You taste, you adjust, without even realizing. So that at the end, that dish is always the same. That's hard to achieve. But that's what happened in a good restaurant. You go there for that specialty, and it's always exactly the way it should be. But then there is those small diversions in between where you have to adjust and do. So there is some doubt in it, yes. I mean, maybe less and less as you get older.
We've been talking to Jacques Pépin, one of the great culinary icons from France and now in the U.S. for all these many years. Thank you for the gift of your time with us today and the joy and the smiles and the good stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And happy cooking to you.
Happy cooking to you. Hello, friends. It's Lee. Wanted to share a podcast with you that you might just love, that some of you may already know about. It's called Death, Sex, and Money. Slate's podcast, where host Anna Sale explores the big questions and hard choices that are often left out of polite conversation. Anna gets to the heart of some of the hardest topics for most people to talk about: death, sex, and money. The more you listen to her show, the more you realize how expansive stories around these topics can be. One week, Anna's talking with comedian Gary Gulman about how being bullied as a kid helped his comedy career. Another, she's speaking to the ex-wife of the founder of the far-right paramilitary group, the Oath Keepers. The show hits on all different sticky topics like overdoses, what it means to be a man, dealing with debt, and how an eating disorder can turn into an obsession with money. Anna is one of the most skilled of interviewers, and I love that she speaks with all different sorts of folks and talks about things that can make us feel bewildered and alone and are often not discussed openly enough. Follow and listen to Death, Sex, and Money wherever you get your podcasts. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible: Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Sophie Byard, Tom Anderson, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, Carriot Harmon, Jason Sheasley, Audrey Griffith, and Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of PRX, Tokens Media LLC, and
Great Feeling Studio.